Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Parul Patel. I'm the Associate Grants Officer for the Quality of Life Grants Program at the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. Welcome to the Reeve Foundation Quality of Life Grants Reporting webinar. We like to keep track of the questions and publish the Q&A. So if you have any questions as I go through the presentation, I request that you type in your questions in the Q&A box and not in the chat box. This way, my teammates on this call will be able to answer as many questions as possible. Hopefully there will be enough time to answer all your questions after the webinar, but if not, you can also forward your questions to qol@christopherreeve.org. So let's begin. As you may recall from the application process, the Christopher and Dana Reeve National Paralysis Resource Center has been federally funded since 2014 through a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administrator for Community Living, also known as ACL. As such, our reporting requirements are dictated by our funder, ACL, and the information requested through the reports is necessary for us to report back to ACL. All required reports and due dates are also included in the fully executed grant agreement. Because we have an obligation to provide timely reporting to ACL, we request that you submit the required reports in a timely manner by the due date and expect proactive communication when this is not possible. I'm responsible within the Reeve Foundation for oversight of the awarded grants, which includes providing guidance to grantees as needed, processing budget changes, no-cost extensions, reviewing and reporting of reports, and closing of the projects. The purpose of today's webinar is to offer guidance on how to complete the interim and final reports for your grant. I will go through these 4 bullet points with some examples for clarity. The next set of reports expected for the reporting are 2022 direct effect first cycle interim reports and what we call 6-month check-in reports for the expanded impact grants, which are due by December 31st, and the final reports for 2021 second cycle direct effect and priority impact, which are due by January 31st, 2023. What I'll do is I'll go through the interim reports first and then follow up with final reporting questions and with financial reporting and budgeting, budget revisions. Once awarded, all required reports are assigned to the person who submitted the application in our grants portal, which is called Founded. This person will get an automated report due reminder email from Founded 30 days prior to the due date. So it is important to let us know when there are any staffing changes to ensure that the right individual receives the email. This email shows the name of the person, the name of the report, due on the subject line, and includes a link to Founded on how to find the report on your dashboard. If you are unable to access the form for any reason, please contact QOL email reference in this email. Once you click on the grants portal link here, you will be brought to this screen. This is the logon page. for Fountain. You can access the dashboard with email of the person assigned to the report and related password. As I mentioned earlier, please contact us through QOL email if you have any issues logging in. Once you log in, you will be brought to your dashboard, which looks something like this. Each follow-up report shows the assigned to name right here. Due date of the report right here, and the status. So complete status is for all reports that have been submitted. In this example, interim report was due and was completed. So the next report that's due is the final report by January 31st, 2023. The edit button indicates the report that needs to be completed next. If you need to exit the report to finish it later, please remember to save the report so as not to lose any updates that you have already made. This will change the status from assigned to draft. When you return, you can resume the updates, and then when finished, you must hit the submit button for us to receive the report. You can confirm this by checking the status. It should say submitted to make sure that the report was actually submitted. If you're not seeing submitted at the end of your report, that means there's something that was missed and you need to go back and hit the submitted button again. Under documents, we have now begun to share your most current budget file. And this file is for your information and needs to be used when reporting on either interim or final. No matter what stage of the reporting you are, this is the most current budget file that you would see. The problem was at one point, folks were submitting budget that didn't match what was actually approved and attached with the grant agreement, or what was approved as a result of a budget revision. So we have now started to share that budget file to make sure that there's no disconnect. This way, you know what the budget approved is. You would simply go into your dashboard, click on this file, download this file, and enter your information for whichever report that you're reporting on. Hopefully, this will make things a lot easier and reduce the incidence of errors going forward. So no matter which report you're working on, project results are evaluated against the proposed or revised activities, outcomes, and budget. So the intent of the interim report is to give us an idea of the project status and how it's progressing midway into the project timeline. So it's a simple report which consists of only 4 questions. So this is the first page of the report where project name, amount awarded, and project type will be pre-filled from your application. Next, you will need to list year-to-date accomplishments relative to proposed activities, like equipment was ordered and received, participants are using the chairs, year-to-date they have used the chairs, and 2 wheelchair basketball games have been offered. So that's an example of what you would indicate here. The next item is project changes. So project changes section, you will need to note any approved modifications like budget revisions, changes in quantities, scope, etc., and its impact on the project. And we noted here in red because we need to approve all project changes prior to submitting this report. This is not our rule. This is something that's dictated by the ACL, our funder. This is what they're looking for, and this is why we need to submit certain information in a certain way. For example, for this one, project changes. If your proposed project was to purchase 4 wheelchairs, but you actually purchased less, then you would state something like the actual unit cost of the proposed chairs was higher than anticipated, right? This is just a hypothetical example. As such, we were able to only purchase 3 chairs rather than 4 chairs. However, since we were able to purchase an additional chair using our internal funds, there will be no impact on the project. This was communicated to the foundation. If I was to read that, I would accept this and I would confirm if it was in fact communicated and move forward with reviewing this report. So again, I cannot stress enough the importance of having all project changes being approved by the foundation, because there are times when we consider things like the impact on the project. Well, if you do X compared to Y, it's going to impact the number of people served. Sometimes it's for the better, and that's great. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it does end up reducing the number of individuals served, in which case we would have to make a note so that when you report your final results, it doesn't go against you and your reporting. The last item on the interim report is financial reporting. This is a hypothetical approved budget for $18,500. As you can see, they have identified personnel for $3,000, equipment for $5,000, consultants for $3,000, supplies, and so on. If they were to submit an interim report for this approved budget that looks something like this, this report would not be accepted for 2 reasons. Because it shows 18,000 versus the approved budget of 18,500. So on this slide, in this example, the approved budget column shows 18,000 only. It should be 18,500. That's why we suggest that to avoid any kind of issues with the starting point of the budget, you take advantage of the file that we're sharing with you on your dashboard. This will eliminate a lot of disconnects and a lot of back and forth and a lot of reverting these reports and to draft and then resubmitting. It will be a win-win situation both for you as well as us. The second reason I would not accept this report is because the expenses are lump summed. As you can see on the bottom, they're including 9,000 as the interim expenses, but they're not being itemized. So we budget everything that we fund line by line. So if you expensed an amount, for example, 2 laptops, if the laptops went over, let's say 4,000, we only funded you 3,000. All we're looking for is 3,000 here. We understand that you must have used different sources of funding, and that's how you were able to secure the 2 laptops. But because we managed what was funded, we would expect to see 3,000 here. So if you were reporting 3,000 expense for laptops, we would accept it. Not that I would reject a report if this was 4,000, but I would certainly question why the amount reported was greater than 3,000. The expenses are not itemized. So that's one thing you need to be mindful of as you fill out these reports. Please, please, please make sure that the interim expenses or final expenses, no matter which report you're filling out, that they are allocated line by line, and they're in line with the approved budget. If you see something that's not budgeted, but you have expensed, you need to stop going forward with this report. You need to contact me at p.patel@Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, state your case, explain why the expense was incurred and what the reasons behind it and what the impact of the change was to the project and why you had to do what you did. And then I would, review that, and then I would forward you the revised budget, which would be shared with you again, and then you would use that file to report your expenses for either of the two reports. A file like this, on the other hand, if this was submitted for interim reporting, it would be accepted because the budget now is in line with what was approved and the interim expenses are itemized. So this is an ideal case. This is how all your expense reporting should be reported, against what was funded. Nothing is out of place. Everything expense is in line with what was funded. Next slide. So after financial reporting, we also provide an opportunity for you to attach any additional material in support of your project. And so like additional pictures, whatever brochures you had, newspaper articles, and so on, videos, anything that you feel would enhance the report, you are welcome to attach in this section. So once this section is done, this would conclude your interim reporting. Like I said, it's a simple report, four questions, and you're done. It's just to give us an idea of where the project is after 6 months, or the interim reporting. In addition to 6-month reporting that we call interim, we have, depending on the tier of the awarded grant, we have additional reports that we require, which are known as the check-in reports. And this may be 6-month check-in or 18-month check-in. For example, Direct Effect is a 12-month grant. So the interim report is a function of 6 months of activity. Expanded Impact grants are 24-month grants. And so the interim is after 12 months of activity. So the interim would be submitted 12 months after the timeline. However, we do require a 6-month check-in report, which is really, really simple, and it consists of only 2 questions, timeline and project changes. So in the timeline, you would report what the status is of your project, whether it's on time or not, and then any project changes. So now that concludes the interim reporting and the check-in reporting. Now we're into final reporting. So like the interim report, this is the email that the person would receive 30 days prior to the report due date. This email would be going out to 2021 second cycle Direct Effect and Priority Impact grants, because these are the reports that we are expecting. The difference from the interim email and final email is the last sentence. The last sentence is, it says, do not submit this report if final expenses show a balance remaining and or expenses do not match the approved budget. So we cannot close a project with an open balance on the grant. All funds must be expensed. So the balance remaining is zero. And the expenses that are being reported need to match the approved budget. If you have either one of these cases or both of these cases, please do not go any further and do not submit that report, the final report, because you would, with an open balance, if you were to submit the report, I would receive it, I would review it, I would revert it back to draft. I would request additional information, and then you would supply the additional information. And who knows, an extension may be needed or a budget revision. So by you not continuing with the report and securing an approval for maybe redirecting the funds or requesting an extension, you would be saving a lot of time on your end as well as our end. So please make sure prior to submitting or even thinking about submitting the report that there is zero balance remaining on the grant. So the intent of the final report is to provide an all-inclusive accounting of refunding in the narrative and in the financial expenditures relative to the proposed activities or pre-approved or revised goals, objectives, and budgets. As with the interim, the project name, the amount awarded, and project completion questions are the same. So this item will be pre-filled, this item will be pre-filled. And again, here's another reminder, do not complete this report if the awarded funds have not been fully expensed, because that only means that the report would be reverted to draft and we'd have to start all over. So if the project is completed in terms of fully expensed and all the activities and outcomes have been completed, you would indicate here, yes, and then move on to the next questions. If it is not completed, you would indicate NA, and then you would state your reason why. So, for example, the project is completed? No, because although the refunding has been fully expended and the playground equipment was received, the installation is still pending. So this is something you would indicate on the explanation of why the project is not completed and move forward with the report. So depending on what you state in that explanation, I will either reach out to you for additional information or clarification and move forward with the approval of the report. But it's a definite rejection of the report if there's a balance remaining on the grant. So the next section is project goals. The project goals will be pre-populated from the application. However, you will need to refer to the revision documents if applicable and add to the narrative. So if this pulled in something from the application and you have since revised your budget where the project goals were also altered in some way, then you would need to indicate. For example, if your original goal was to serve 50 people and now something happened and you wrote to us and you told us that because of this and that, we'll only be able to serve this much. The updated number of people to serve is less than the people proposed. So you would indicate that here and you would say, approval was received from the foundation to go with this change and so on. So under project goals, you will read the final here. This is something that you would put in relative to what was proposed or what was revised. So you will report accomplishments and outcomes achieved based on your original proposed goals or revised goals. So, for example, if your goal was to increase accessibility to the community center for 50 people with paralysis to serve by replacing a ramp, then your response would be the ramp was purchased and installed to ensure accessibility for 50 people with paralysis. If this goal was partially met, let's say the ramp was purchased and installed to ensure accessibility, but for only 30 people, your explanation would be the project manager had to take unanticipated leave of absence, for example, which delayed the project timeline and outreach initiatives, resulting in less than anticipated people served. So that's something that you would write in this box if it wasn't fully met. Let's see, project changes is the next question. So for project changes, here's where you would note the changes to the project, including the way the program was delivered, budget changes, or no cost extensions, etc. If no budget changes were made, then write none. Or any. If changes were made, then indicate the change and state why it was needed. And hopefully that change was pre-approved. For example, proposed ramp was purchased at a reduced cost, less than originally quoted, which resulted in a savings of X number of dollars, right? The approval was given by the foundation to redirect the saves from equipment to personnel to offset the cost of hiring an interim project manager. This is just a hypothetical example. So this is something, this is the type of response that you would indicate here. Any changes that were made to the project compared to the proposed or the revised goals or outcomes of the project. For project measures, which is the next sections, if you include it, you have to measure it. Again, this all goes back to the original proposal or your application. If you indicated an output, so the output is a number, like an increase in the number of people served. An outcome is the change in someone's attitude, knowledge or behavior, like an increase in someone's knowledge about a topic or a higher level of satisfaction or happiness or an increased quality of life, for example. If the proposed measurable result included the number of clients served, the number of therapy sessions provided, and self-reported impact results from clients, and that would be something like, let's say, 25 people with paralysis will receive 100 equine therapy sessions, and majority will report a positive. So for output number here, you would indicate 25 people with paralysis received 100 equine therapy sessions. For outcome, you would indicate, and this is again a hypothetical example, you would indicate 96% of respondents reported a positive impact on their overall health and wellness. 90% of the respondents reported that services received had a positive impact on social interactions. And 100% of reported 100% of the respondents reported an improved quality of life. So that's an example of what you would put as the final impact in this section here. Evaluations and outcomes results. However, if the output was reduced, let's say from 25 proposed to 20 people with paralysis, then you would say, the output explanation would be serve 20 people with paralysis, actual versus 25 people proposed, but however, 100 sessions were offered, and then you would indicate, although, we only served 20 people, the registrations the proposed number was based on the number of registrations and the number of anticipated individuals to participate, for reasons X, Y, and Z, like, let's say, lack of transportation or caregiver availability. 5 people were unable to participate in this activity. And that would explain why your proposed number of 25 was reduced to 20. And we would accept that. The impact, number of people with proposed here. This is a similar impact, except it's for family members and caregivers of those living with paralysis. So this number here would be pre-filled. And this is something that you would indicate as the actual. So what you're doing is you're comparing what was proposed against what was actual, and then providing an explanation. And this would be in line with what was proposed and explained with the previous section, where you're dealing with people with paralysis. Usually family members on average are estimated 1 or 2 family members or caregivers per individual served. So if there was a reduction in the number of people with paralysis served, it stands to reason that there would be a reduction in the number of family members and caregivers served. The next section deals with challenges. This is where you would state the challenges or difficulties encountered during this project, like staffing changes, for example, or lack of participants, or contractor issues, or availability of equipment, or, whatever that was lacking, you would indicate that here. In addition to indicating what the challenge was, we would also be interested in knowing how you were able to overcome that challenge. For example, if you were to write, for example, your response may be, we were unable to purchase the proposed equipment X because it was no longer available. After consulting multiple manufacturers, we were able to find a similar equipment, we'll call it Y, with a slight difference in price. After getting pre-authorization from the REEF Foundation for this change, we made the purchase. So that's an example of what you would indicate here as, challenge and how you overcame that challenge. Okay, the next section deals with lessons learned. Under lessons learned, you can share what you have learned as a result of this project. For example, what will you be doing? Will you be doing anything different as a result of this project going forward? Have you collaborated with different organizations or groups of people that yielded a positive impact on the project and your processes? What worked? What didn't work? A sample response would be additional collaboration had a significant impact on our program by increasing demand for the services we provide. To ensure continuous delivery of this program and services, we will need to seek additional funding and resources to meet the demand. So that's an example of what you would write here. Another example would be our outreach efforts led to formation of new partnership with organization X, Y, and Z. Through this partnership, we were able to increase awareness of the services offered by our organization, our list of clients, and demand for our services increased by 10%, 20%, depending on what it was. We were able to serve X amount more clients than originally proposed. We will continue to build upon this partnership and beyond this grant period. So that's another example of what you would indicate here. Sometimes I do, depending on what is indicated here, I do use this information when other individuals or other organizations are experiencing some challenges, similar challenges, and it is quite helpful. And we do report on this information to ACL. All right, the next section is final reporting, financial reporting. So again, you must use the most current project budget with this report. And you can find the most current project budget, which is an Excel budget file on your dashboard. Do not submit this report if the expense file shows balance remaining and or expenses do not match the approved budget. So we, again, as I mentioned earlier, we manage what we fund line by line. So if you are reporting that you spent X amount of dollars in equipment ABC, but that equipment was not on the approved funding, then we would have to do a budget revision, in which case, I would have to revert this report back to draft and do a budget revision prior to approving the final report and closing out this project. So here, this is an example of if this was submitted with the final report, the report would be rejected because, as you can see, there's a balance remaining of $500. Unless this was zero, I would be reverting this report to draft and looking for an explanation as to how the grantee was planning to expense the $500 remaining on their budget. On the other hand, if they were submitting this budget, I would have no issues. So this would be accepted, where the budget approved amount is $10,000, the expenditures to date are $10,000, the balance remaining is zero. So this is an example where the same budget was revised and pre-authorized because let's say they got a $500 discount on the ramp that they purchased, and that's why there was $500 remaining. The approved, so they submit a budget revision request to say we received a discount on the price of the ramp of $500. So we would like to use the saves of $500 and apply those $500 towards personnel costs. I would review the budget revision request and I would issue a budget revision, and then I would share this file, which they would use. So the budget revision approved amount is $500 under personnel, and equipment cost is $9,500. So then in this case, that budget would be approved. If this was submitted as the expense file for the revised budget, so in the revision, $500 were added to personnel costs and $9,500 were within the equipment costs. Yet this is what they submitted. Well, then this would not be approved because, again, it doesn't reflect the most current budget. I would have expected $9,500 here as the approved budget, because that is the most current budget after the revision, and $500 here. So this does not match the revised budget. Hence, I would be reverting this report back to draft and look for a revised expense file which reflects the actual current budget after the revision. So this would be the correct. If they were to submit this file, I would have no issues. This file would be in line with what was revised, and the report would be approved. So I just want to go over what the budget revision requirements are. So say this was the approved budget. It was $5,000 for personnel, $16,000 for equipment, and so on. So the total budget was for $4,000. And so what you would do is you would go to your dashboard, pull up this file, which was the most current. You would add a column and just call it budget revision requested. And in this column, you would work up the numbers as you would like to see them. So this is the starting point. This is where you're going to end up after the revision, because this is now your new anticipated cost of the project. So based on these numbers, I am understanding that $3,000 was originally budgeted, and you're adding $3,000 as the final cost because for whatever reason, it will require $6,000 expenses under the executive director for this project. There's no change in in the equipment cost. But here, the $3,000 that is being added to personnel is coming from the consultant line. So with this request, I would expect an explanation as to why this budget change is needed. So, for example, it could be that we want to reallocate $3,000 from consultant to executive director because the proposed consultant is unavailable to provide exercise instructions. And this is, again, a hypothetical example. Our executive director is certified exercise instructor and will offer classes in-house. I would have no issues with this and would authorize it. So I would look at to make sure that the original budget is the same as the revised budget. Remember, we cannot change the amount awarded. It must be within the 24,000. Any lines you want to change must add up to 24,000. So in this one, yes, it does. So now I'm looking at their timeline. Okay, this revision is submitted after the interim report. So then I would go in and I would look at their interim expenses. And when I look at their interim expenses, I notice that on their interim expense, they reported an expense of $1,000 under exercise instructor. Yet they want to move the entire $3,000. Well, this is not doable. You can only, so the maximum allowed, given that $1,000 was already expensed against this line, you cannot move or revise the full amount of the approved budget. you must retain $1,000 in this line to revise the budget. So the maximum amount that you can reallocate from this consultant line is $2,000. I would question this, and then, the grantee would have to go back and revise their numbers. So if after the revising of this file, if they submitted this file, I would have no issues. This budget would be approved and it can be used as the most current budget. Okay, so this is the correct file. It shows that $1,000 was left in there based on the amount expense reported, and only 2,000 was added to this line, and then the bottom line matches 24. Yes, everything checks out. The explanation checks out. Yes, this is a good budget revision request and it can be approved. So the last section is additional material and any additional supporting materials. So any information that you would like to include, like photographs or videos, etc., can be uploaded under additional material. We also need you to fill out the impact evaluation that's at the end of this report. This evaluation survey is managed by Vanderbilt University, and the Reed Foundation Satisfaction Survey helps us to improve our process. So that concludes this webinar. I hope that it was helpful for you in providing some clarity on how to complete the required reports. Now we can take the questions. Time permitting, we'll try to answer all the questions that you have.
So, Parul, we've answered most of the questions in the question and answer box, but there are two, and I'd especially like you to, weigh in on the first one that are in here. Maria is responding now to the second, but it's from Judy, and she's just saying, is there a form or official process for requesting a no-cost extension?
There is no, so the process for no-cost extension is you would send me an email, state your case, why a no-cost extension is required. We would internally here, the QOL team, I would look at the reasons for the extension, and based on the email request, if there's any follow-up questions, I would, get in touch with you and follow up and make sure all of the requirements are met. And once everything is met, an extension would be given. So there is no formal process as such. It's like a budget request. You would request an extension by stating your reasons as to why the extension is needed. Basically, that's it.
Parul, there's a question from Luke in the question and answer. It says, if we were still able to complete the project before the end of the grant period, but the equipment was received in month 4 instead of month 2, that would not require a formal approval, correct?
That is correct, unless that is going to impact your number of people served. What does that mean for the folks that you'll be serving? Did you base your proposed number of people to serve on receiving the equipment on month 2? Does that have any impact on the people served? That would be my question. And again, it would not, that doesn't say that you won't be able to close out the project. The project timeline delay, although it would not qualify for an extension, you would just need to indicate that because of that delay, there was a difference in the number of people proposed to serve if it did impact your number of people to serve. versus what the actual number was.
But would you need approval for that?
No, you would not need an approval. But if you were to say, okay, if the final report pulled in from your proposal, number of people to serve was 50, and now you're filling out your actuals and the number of people served was 40, then I would question, what caused that difference? Why were you not able to serve all 50 as proposed? And your explanation would be because the anticipated date of receipt of the equipment was in month 2. However, we didn't get the equipment until month 4, hence the lower number of people served. That would be your explanation.
And just the last thing that I want to add, Pearl, I did type this in the chat, but I just, I want to reiterate that we would never want to receive money back from you, the organization. So we will always work with you
Right.
to either do some kind of extension to see if we can serve more people through extending the project,
Right.
or through using the funds, reallocating them to another aspect of the project that would enhance the project in certain ways. And Parul is always more than happy to work with you on that, so that we would never request the funds back, unless the grant
Right.
was eliminated or there was some really
Well-
gross negligence. But in
Right.
most cases, we will always work with you.
Absolutely. So the reports are not meant, aha, got you moments, right? The reports are never about that. The reports are always about, okay, what value add was this to you as an organization? What did you learn from it? What were you able to accomplish? What did the funding get you? What did it do for the target population, namely, folks with paralysis? So it's always about stressing the positives of the grant. And life happens, and there are going to be instances where you're going to come across, difficulties, hurdles, obstacles, where we don't live in a perfect world. So things are going to impact your project somewhat negatively, but that's not to say that, you'll be reprimanded in any way. No, that's not it. We want all our grantees to succeed. We are here to offer guidance and help you succeed, because your success is a function of our success. And, for that reason, we want to make sure that, all our grantees are armed with the information and the tools that will ensure that success. So I, like myself and the entire QOL team, we are here to assist in any way possible. The problem is a problem when folks are not being proactive. And if we have to follow up, let's say a grantee has not submitted their interim or final report. Well, we call them, we leave messages, and, they may have a valid reason as to why they've not submitted the report, but from where we sit, we don't know. And this is why we would encourage proactive communication, so that, we both have the same understanding. Yes. Okay, I understand you're going through this situation and we're here to help. No worries. We can make this exception. We can make this happen to make sure that the project is, if not timely, is successful. It doesn't, if we have to give you an extension, no issues. We understand your situation and we don't mind issuing an extension. But all we ask is that the grantee be proactive in their communication. That's all. Because from where we sit, we don't know. And if we're making several attempts and there's a complete lack of response on the other end, then it becomes problematic.
I think we're good. I think we've answered all the questions, and
Oh, good.
if there are any other, Parul's email is here.
Yes.
Patel@christopherreeve.org. And yeah, thank you all so much for being here. And thank you so much, Parul. This was really wonderful.
Oh, no issues. And like I said, myself, the entire Quality of Life grants team is here at your disposal at any time. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any one of us and would be glad to assist. Thank you all for joining.